This is the University of Toledo. We are a national public research university focused on student success and exceptional patient care. Our students obtain a world-class education, becoming a diverse community of leaders committed to improving the human condition. For 150 years, we have been the City of Toledo's university. We are proud of our history, forever connected to our region's future. And we're proud of our humble beginnings and storied history, and we're just getting started. As natural problem solvers, we are inquisitive, in search of what if? We are a community that rallies around one another. Rocket Nation, we bleed blue and gold. Innovative, we are not afraid to do what has not been done, to do better, think smarter, and achieve greater. The University of Toledo is impactful. We do critical work, a launching pad for a better tomorrow. From producing the next generation of leaders, to driving the local economy and caring for patients in our community. We are the University of Toledo, and we are celebrating history and fueling tomorrows.
If we could have everybody go ahead and take a seat, we're going to get going here in just a minute. Got a great crowd here. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Adrienne King, and it's my honor to serve as the University of Toledo's Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and I'm also one of the co-chairs of the Sesquicentennial Planning Committee. I want to welcome all of you that are joining us either online or here in Toledo as we celebrate this once-in-a-lifetime event. Following today's lecture, I invite those of you attending in person to take some time to check out the Canaday Center's exhibit behind me, commemorating our 150-year history. For those of you who are attending virtually, there is a guided video tour of the exhibit that's available online. Joining us for today's celebration is a very special guest, Ohio's Chancellor of Higher Education, Randy Gardner. Chancellor Gardner was appointed by Governor Mike DeWine as the 10th Chancellor of the Ohio Department of Higher Education in January 2019. As Chancellor, he oversees the state's 2-year and 4-year colleges and universities and Ohio technical centers. Before becoming Chancellor, Gardner served a combined total of 33 years in the Ohio Senate and House of Representatives. A well-respected leader, Gardner served in 7 different elected leadership positions, including the chairman of both House and Senate higher education committees. He also is a former educator, having previously taught high school history and government. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Gardner.
I was all excited. She indicated there would be some special guest, and I was all excited as to who that would be. I guess you thought it was me. So, but thank you again for the U Toledo welcome. Always love coming back on campus and visiting with folks. And as a history teacher, I have a special interest in what goes on here, and spent some time touring the back room here. And if you haven't been there yet, you need to do that. Quite a bit of it I knew, not because I lived through all of it, like one of you has asserted earlier today. But it's really great to not only respect where we are and where we're going, but reflect on the past. Also honored to represent Mike DeWine, Governor. If it wasn't for Mike DeWine, I wouldn't be standing here as Chancellor. So he's passes along his best wishes for the future. I know has had working relationship with the President and others here at the university. The best news really is I have no speech. And usually that elicits wild applause. Okay. When I was in the Senate, I used to say, sir, I'm going to raise your taxes. But see, I can't do that anymore because I'm not in the Senate anymore. But no, I remember, I do want to say something about the President. And that is when they were anxious times in this city and on this campus, he came to this city, and within days, I think we had breakfast on a patio outside, of course, during COVID, and talked over things I knew right then. Wow, there's going to be an issue here about trying to keep this leader on this campus for more than a year, and I'm so glad you are, Mr. President. I want to congratulate you on your leadership and the trajectory we're on here. It was necessary to have an impactful leader at that time in this university's history, and Dr. Postal, President Postal, has fulfilled that. But it's also appropriate, I think, at this time to not only look to the future, and we talk almost every month about where we are today, where we're headed next month, next year, but on a 150th celebration, I think it's appropriate to ask the questions, where would we be if there was no University of Toledo? And without going into all the things that University of Toledo does so well and continues to make an impact on this community in the areas of engineering, of healthcare, of medicine, of Lake Erie water quality research, so many areas, we would be diminished without this campus, without this leadership, without this university, and all of those, both faculty and students, staff, and leaders who have come and gone, and those who still persist to make a real impact on our community. So I want to congratulate you on that. I got to also thinking, where would we be without the University of Toledo? Well, I know that my alma mater would have more wins in basketball and football if it wasn't for the University of Toledo, I'll tell you that. I don't want that to get back, by the way, down 75, let people know down in BG that I said that, but happens to be true. So congratulations on 150 years, great working with you, and on behalf of Governor DeWine and the department, we really look forward to continuing to work with you, strengthen the University of Toledo, make Northwest Ohio and Ohio stronger because of this great university. God bless, and thanks for having me.
Chancellor, we have just a small gift for you. We want to make sure you do represent the right colors, so a little bit of history.
I got it.
Chancellor Gardner, thank you for joining us on this momentous day.
You're welcome.
The university has received a number of proclamations and recognitions recognizing this special moment in our university's history from our elected officials. I want to thank Congressman Latta and our mayor and all of those who support this fantastic university. If you're interested in seeing these, they're on display in the exhibit behind me. Here today to share his vision for the next 150 years is our 18th president of the University of Toledo, Dr. Gregory Postal. President Postal joined the university in 2020 in the midst of a global pandemic. Bear with me, I just want to share a few of the highlights from his first 2 years. Under his leadership, the university safely navigated the pandemic while reopening campus. He led the stabilization of our hospital, which was recently recognized as the 5th safest academic medical center in the nation. Thank you. And in 2021, the university received a successful 10-year reaffirmation of accreditation status from the Higher Learning Commission. The university's research profile continues to grow as awards have increased 62% in the past 5 years. And the momentum continues as just last month, U-Toledo was recognized for the first time among the top universities in the country and the 2022-23 U.S. News & World Report Best College Rankings. President Postal.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Chancellor Gardner, thank you so much for being here. Good afternoon. On behalf of all of the students and the faculty and the staff of the University of Toledo, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you all today to the Carlson Library. This is indeed a momentous occasion for the University of Toledo. A sesquicentennial. Today is our 150th anniversary since our founding in 1872, when articles of incorporation at that time were drawn up for the Toledo University of Arts and Trades. That marked the beginning of a storied history, but it's just the beginning. And as was mentioned today, what is most important is the 150 years yet to come. When I joined the University of Toledo, I was immediately impressed by the tremendous pride and enthusiasm that alumni, staff, faculty, and students feel for the university. The impact of this university goes well beyond the campus borders. It's felt throughout the city of Toledo, in Northwest Ohio, and beyond. In fact, there are currently 168,000 living alumni of the University of Toledo, each one of whom is out doing something to live up to our mission, that being to improve the human condition. So as we reflect today and we hear Barbara's wonderful research and work about the history of the University of Toledo, we must also look to the future. So we are in the midst of the preparation of our strategic plan, which will help guide the efforts of our university in the next 5 years. And that plan will be released in January of this coming calendar year. So there's a great deal of work going into this plan today. Now, as you might imagine, there are some things that we have been doing that we have absolutely no intentions of changing. So for starters, our dedication to our students, from the day they are recruited until the day they graduate will not change. That is our important mission and one from which we will not waver. It is what also defines the basis for economic health and prosperity of this region of the state. So this is a critical component of why we were here, and this will not change. We also pride ourselves on the fact that we are a research university. So as you might imagine, our commitment to research will not change. It is enormously important to our faculty, and it also contributes to the value of the education our students receive, because so many of them participate in the work that is done by our faculty researchers. So you'll see that that trajectory will continue. And of course, we're also an academic medical center. And as had been mentioned, not only is the hospital doing well, we're doing so well that we are now the 5th safest hospital in the country. And to me, that's so much more important than any financial measure I could give you. Saying that a hospital is safe is so much more important than saying a hospital makes a lot of money. So I'm really proud of that fact. So you'll see a continuing commitment to our academic medical center. But let's keep in mind that because we are doing our strategic planning and because we live in a time of unprecedented change, there will be things that we have to do that will look different in the years to come. So for instance, in terms of what we teach, many of the jobs that will be available tomorrow are jobs that don't even exist today. And so we have to make sure that we are teaching our students in an appropriate way, not just an effective way, but in a relevant way for something that will allow them to be gainfully employed in the future. So that's going to cause us to have to prioritize and pivot and focus our resources in areas that will have the most impact in the future. And so this is a huge part of our strategic planning process as we conduct it today. It will also be necessary for us to teach students in different ways, hybrid classes, online classes. Not everything is going to be the same as the traditional type of education that has taken place over the years. And so we have to be able to adapt and teach in modern ways. We will certainly continue our groundbreaking research. The university has developed several important niches in research that have enabled us to post the kinds of numbers that Adrian mentioned earlier. A lot of it is around sustainability, studying the water in the lake, making sure it's clean, looking at harmful algal blooms, invasive species. Our landmark work in solar energy now goes back 30 years. We'll obviously continue now with a new grant from the Department of Energy. We do work on our health science campus around cell architecture and dynamics, astronomy and astrophysics. Look at the James Webb Space Telescope, for example, as a perfect example of UToledo right in the forefront in the national news on research. And then things like human trafficking and disability studies round out a very long list of research accomplishments that we will continue to pursue. So while there will certainly be challenges in the years ahead, I have no worries that we will be able to persevere, because we have for 150 years, and we will continue to do so. So today, let us learn from our past, let us celebrate the present, and let us look forward to the future, the next 150 years of the University of Toledo. The next introduction I have to make is one that I'm very excited about, and that is our speaker, Barbara Floyd. Barbara is a 3-time graduate, believe it or not, of the University of Toledo. She received her bachelor's degree here as well as 2 master's degrees. She has been part of the campus community for many, many years, serving in leadership roles here at the Carlson Library, head of the Canaday Center for Special Collections, which is where our archive is housed. And she has recently written a new book, which you see here, and Yarko has copies of it on the desk over there. It's an institution for the promoting of knowledge, the University of Toledo at 150. This book is available through UToledo Press online, and Barbara has been gracious enough to indicate that she will donate the proceeds from the sale of this book to the Canaday archives for the work that they do. So that said, I'm thrilled to welcome to the podium Barbara Floyd. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. I would like to take just a few minutes to thank some people who helped me in the research and writing of my book over the course of the past 3 years. First and foremost, Yarko Kook, the managing editor of the University of Toledo Press, who showed his faith in me by asking me to undertake this very important project. Also, my appreciation to Sarah Mauk and Tamara Jones from the Ward M. Canaday Center for their help in helping me find information I needed for my research. And then they, along with Judson Lohman, produced the incredible exhibit that you see inside the Canaday Center, and I urge you all to take a look at that. In February and March, when he probably had a lot better things to do, President Postal spent several hours talking with me about his views of the history of the university and what he sees as his future, and I've incorporated much of that information into the last chapter of the book. Also, Dr. Andy Jorgensen, Dr. Michael Dowd, and Dr. David Lindsley read some of the early drafts of a few of the chapters and provided their insight. Lastly, I would like to give a very personal thanks to someone who's always been there for me throughout my career, especially during the time that I was working on this book, and that's my husband, Bill Little. I always counted on Bill to read over my finished book manuscripts and give me his honest feedback, but unfortunately Bill suffered a serious stroke in March and has been unable to read this book yet, but I have offered to read it to him aloud several times, but he hasn't taken me up on that offer. I appreciate that he gave me the extensive time to work on this book and his patience as we learn to navigate a new world of unexpected life events. So with that, in order to prepare a lecture that covers 150 years of history of the University of Toledo that can be delivered in under an hour, I decided to focus on just 10 events that shaped those years and brought us to where we are in 2022. Coming up with that list of events was no easy task, and hopefully through these events, I can provide an overview of the amazing history of our institution and encourage you to find out more about what happened for the years I am unable to cover, maybe even by buying a copy of the book. So, event number 1, the founding of the University of Toledo of Arts and Trades, 1872. Not surprisingly, the first event I want to talk about is the first event in our history, and that is how this institution came to be. To understand that, I want to talk about our founder, Jessup W. Scott. In my book, I describe Scott's decision to establish what became this university as an audacious dream based on a dubious premise. So let me explain what I mean. No one can be exactly certain why Scott, who made his fortune speculating on land in Northwest Ohio, decided to use some of that land as an endowment for a university in 1872. He may have been influenced by the efforts of other wealthy men who endowed similar institutions, such as Peter Cooper in New York. He may have been trying to blunt criticisms of his land speculation, which many felt was detrimental to Toledo's growth. Or it may have been because of his age. At the time he established the Toledo University of Arts and Trades on October 12, 1872, he was 73 years old. He would live for less than 2 more years. This was a way to establish his legacy in his adopted city. But more than likely, founding this university was a way to see his dream of Toledo as the future great city of the world come true. For over 40 years, Scott had been writing articles published in some of the leading economic journals of the day, promoting the natural attributes of Toledo. After several failed attempts and careers in teaching and law and newspaper publishing, Scott, who had come to Ohio from Connecticut in 1832, began writing about how Northwest Ohio was a prime place for future development. He also began buying up huge tracts of land between 2 struggling settlements on the mouth of the Maumee River, Vistula and Port Lawrence, and you see those in the red outlined areas on the map. At one time, the maps of the city would show Scott as the owner of land stretching from one side of the city to the other. When Vistula and Port Lawrence decided to merge to form Toledo in 1837, Scott found himself owning most of the downtown, which turned out to be one of his wisest investments. Scott was called an urbanist because, unlike most people at the time who believed America's future would be one populated by independent yeoman farmers, Scott believed that cities represented the future of the country. While many saw cities as evil and thought they made men weaker, Scott saw them as engines of growth and progress. Scott devoted much of his study to where the next great city would be located. Using what he called the doctrine of natural advantages, Scott believed cities would succeed or fail based on geographic factors such as soil, topography, and particularly climate. He came to believe that the best men and the best civilizations were produced in temperate climes, such as the Midwest. After studying the factors that he believed would lead to a successful city, in 1868 he published a pamphlet titled A Presentation of Causes Tending to Fix the Position of the Future Great City of the World. Quote, "It is only following out a course of events to anticipate, as the crowning result, one great center, one city of the world, which shall be the acknowledged focus and radiating point of the country's wealth, intelligence, and moral power," unquote. Looking carefully at the geographic assets, Scott decided, not unsurprisingly, that the place destined to become the future great city of the world was the place where he owned a great deal of land, Toledo, Ohio. One could cynically conclude that Scott's writings were merely a way to prop up his real estate investments. If others came to believe Toledo would be the future great city of the world, he stood to vastly increase his personal wealth. And if Toledo was to be the future great city of the world, it would need a university for an educated populace. To make his audacious dream become a reality, Scott set aside 160 acres of land that he owned located near where one of the largest railroad terminals in North America was to be built as an endowment for a university. Land today we know as Scott Park. The university was to be called the Toledo University of Arts and Trades. The focus of the institution was on training Toledo's young people in the skills they would need to grow the city's industrial base. The school was to be free for those who could not afford it and was to be open to both men and women. Plans for University Place were drawn up showing 40 acres of Scott's land endowment as the location for the university. Land was also set aside for faculty houses, and the rest was to be leased to entities who would want to be located near the railroad terminal, and these leases would fund the university. Which brings me to event number 2, becoming a municipal university in 1884. Unfortunately, Jessup Scott did not live to see his university open its doors. On January 22nd, 1874, he passed away, leaving his 3 sons, Frank, Maurice, and William, to represent the Scott family on the Board of Trustees. Upon his death, in the minutes of the trustees was recorded this notice, that in the death of Jessup Wigman Scott, this city has lost one of its oldest and most esteemed citizens, and this university its founder and benefactor. A man whose life exemplified truth, nobility, and love of humanity, which prompted him to donate a large part of his fortune to establish in this city an institution for the promoting of knowledge in the arts and trades and related sciences. Scott's death was not the only setback for the Toledo University of Arts and Trades. A year after its founding, a national recession drastically reduced the net worth of Scott's land holdings. The Panic of 1873 was the result of a speculative financial bubble in the railroad industry that caused several national banks to fail. As a result, the railroad terminal was not built, and no one was interested in leasing the area that was to surround the university. Without funding from the leases of land near the terminal, the Toledo University of Arts and Trades was in drastic straits. Trustee Albert Maycomber, at the same meeting where the board noted the death of Scott, suggested a radical funding source: give the university to the city of Toledo so that it could become a municipal institution. Public funding was allowed under the terms of the Scott Trust. Maycomber, along with Frank Scott, drafted a strong statement urging the city to assume the institution. They said the assets of the university were valued at $120,000, which is a little doubtful at the time, and furthermore said the land would increase in value to be worth over $250,000 in a few years. Frank Scott also urged the city fathers to look at the impact of the universities on the great cities of Europe as a model for what could be. Scott and Maycomber's arguments were not enough to sway city council. They rejected the offer by a vote of 4-3. The future of the Toledo University of Arts and Trades looked dim. But the trustees moved forward anyway. Rather than construct buildings on the Scott Trust, one of the trustees donated an old unfinished church building located downtown for classes. A school of design was established, and the only courses offered were mechanical, architectural, and freehand drawing that were all taught by a single faculty member. Wealthy donors who was expected to step up and help underwrite the institution did not. Frank Scott was paying many of the bills out of his own pocket. By 1878, it was clear that the institution could not survive, and it closed its doors. But the dream of Jessup Scott did not die, and his sons, particularly Frank, kept trying to find a way to reopen the school. In the 1880s, a new concept in education called manual training schools had been developed in St. Louis. Manual training promoted educating both the head and the hand equally by offering a half day of standard academic training and a half day of vocational training. After graduation, students would go on to any field, and by uniting their head and their hand, they would be better prepared for whatever they chose to do. Frank Scott was very interested in manual training, and with these new ideas for the school, the directors again approached the city of Toledo in February 1884 and again proposed the city take over the remaining assets of the Toledo University of Arts and Trades and reopen it as a manual training school. This time, the city agreed on February 18, 1884, what remained of the Toledo University of Arts and Trades was assumed by the city, and the university started an 83-year history as a municipal institution. While this saved the university, it was anything but smooth sailing under city control. The Board of Trustees of the university were frequently in conflict with the Board of Education over who controlled the institution. The manual training school was not a post-secondary school, but rather a 3-year program beginning in the 8th grade. It was the first publicly supported manual training school in the nation, and it served as a model for other cities. As the Scott sons retired from service on the Board of Trustees, remaining members sought to move the institution beyond manual training and towards becoming a real university. Struggles continued and escalated over control and mission. Dr. John Pyle, a well-respected physician and a trustee, believed the institution could best serve Toledo by becoming a real university. And to move in that direction, he proposed merging it with the Toledo Medical College, a fledgling and underfunded medical college located downtown. City Council became enmeshed in the struggle between the trustees and the Board of Education and refused year after year to adequately fund what was now referred to as Toledo University. Against this backdrop, a most unusual opportunity presented itself. An anonymous donor offered to fund the institution because he believed Toledo should have a university comparable to what many other growing industrial cities had. The Board of Directors considered the proposal in February 1900, but several were unhappy with restrictions the donor placed on the gift and his refusal to come forward and be known. Only after the directors turned down the gift did they learn that their would-be benefactor was Andrew Carnegie. Later that year, Mr. Carnegie established the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh. After rejecting the Carnegie proposal, Toledo University continued to struggle. The issue of who controlled the university, its directors or the Board of Education, went all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court, which in 1911 finally found in favor of the directors as an independent board. But by now, many powerful people in the city had turned against the university, and some campaigned openly against it, including Albert Macomber. The first president, Jerome Raymond, was appointed in 1909. When the city of Toledo decided to buy an elephant for the zoo for $2,400, President Raymond pointed out that this was the same exact amount the city was giving to fund Toledo University for 1 year. City Council was not moved by his argument and refused additional funding. After a year, Raymond had had enough and quit. The Toledo Medical College, unable to keep up with the demands to improve the quality of medical education with limited funding, closed its doors. That would be the end of medical education in Toledo until the 1960s. Fortunately, the university turned the corner. In an agreement with the Board of Education, and the directors gave the manual training school to the Education Board, and in exchange, they were given a rundown elementary school at 11th and Illinois, which was renovated into a new home for the university. Funding slowly increased under the presidency of A. Monroe Stowe, who was appointed in 1914. He expanded the curriculum and grew enrollment, and by the 1920s, Toledo University was thriving with an enrollment of over 2,000. Support from the city stabilized, and while it remained inadequate, it was enough to keep the institution moving forward. It had a College of Arts and Sciences, a business college, an engineering college, a college of pharmacy, a teacher's college, and a law school. And it even had a football team, although the first game was lost to the University of Detroit by a score of 145-0. So that Ohio State game was really not that bad. It really wasn't. One thing it did have, however, was an adequate place to hold classes. Which brings me to event number 3, what I call the Miracle on Bancroft Street, 1928 to 1932. For its first 60 years, the University of Toledo held classes at various times in a renovated church, an annex to the Central High School, a medical school building, an office building, an old elementary school, and 2 buildings constructed on the Scott Park campus, what it was today, the Scott Park campus, they're originally built for soldiers and workers during World War I. Between 1924, when A. Monroe Stowe resigned, and 1927, it also went through a succession of 3 presidents. John W. Dowd, who was appointed in 1925, lived for less than a year, and Ernest W. Smith passed away of a heart attack before even taking office in December 1926. So there's a theme running through here, Dr. Postal. In 1927, the directors launched a national search for yet another president. Dr. Henry Dorman, acting president of the University of Puerto Rico, became president in January 1928. Dorman realized that the future of the university depended on a new campus that would adequately house the growing institution. In what was probably the most important decision in the university's history, he asked Toledo taxpayers in November 1928 to approve a bond levy to raise $2.8 million for a new campus. If he had waited just 1 year to commence the campaign, it likely would not have succeeded because of the stock market crash in November 1929 that ushered in the start of the Great Depression. It is doubtful if the university could have survived in its inadequate makeshift facilities until the Depression ended. It was not only Dorman's decision to ask the voters for money in 1928 that changed the university's future. It was also his vision for the campus, where it was to be located and what it was to look like, that changed everything. While many had an opinion about where the new campus should be located, the board of directors and Dorman listened to the advice of urban planner Harold Bartholomew, who recommended a farm on Bancroft Street that was owned by Rufus Baker. As Bartholomew described the property, it seems to divide itself into 4 different levels. The portion along the street, constituting perhaps 1/4 of the plot, recedes gradually. An abrupt drop brings one to a beautiful wooded area with a broad winding stream known as 10 Mile Creek. Beyond the stream, the land undulates to heights that correspond possibly to the level of Bancroft Street. The area along the street should give us an opportunity for an imposing building group, with the administration building as the center, perhaps, and commanding interest and attention from the approach along Bancroft Street. It would be of adequate acreage set in the heart of a fine residential part of the city and would be a source of pride to both students and citizens and would serve as a notable showplace for the city of Toledo. And I think Mr. Bartholomew was right on. While the selection did not please everyone, the university paid $275,000 for the entire site. 2 days after the planned groundbreaking, the stock market crashed and billions of dollars in the U.S. economy were wiped out overnight. The ceremony was delayed until March 3rd, 1930, an overcast day with much of the field where the buildings were to be constructed covered in mud. And that's Dr. Dorman looking a little like Stalin there. There were no requirements that the new campus buildings be anything but utilitarian, like those the university had previously occupied. But President Dorman had other ideas. He spent time touring other college campuses and brought architect Charles Clowder of Philadelphia, author of the book Collegiate Architecture in America, which had been published in 1929, in as a consultant. Working with the local architectural firm of Mills, Rhine, Spellman, and Nordhoff, the plans for the campus were an immediate hit. It was described in the Toledo Times, was described in the Toledo Times, the plans called for a building with a classic tower in the center and broad sloping roofed wings on either side. The central buildings as pictures represent dignity and symmetry, hearkening back to the English tradition, to the peacefully studious influence of Oxford and Cambridge, where education has become a fine art. When completed, the University of Toledo not only finally had a permanent campus, but the first time it looked like a university. University Hall and the Field House were constructed by 400 men in just 11 months, in the middle of the worst years of the Depression. It gave hope to not just the students, but to the entire city that the future could be better. However, some community members thought the style was a little too extravagant to be built in the middle of difficult economic times. Many criticized the ornamental tower and the fact that the building used stone instead of cheaper brick. But Dorman pointed out that the construction costs had plummeted and the stone actually cost $100,000 less than brick would have cost before the Depression. The tower, he said, added only $75,000 to the cost of the building. Dorman directed his most stirring remarks to the University of Toledo students, both present and future. Quote, "We believe you are going to respond to the challenge of a beautiful environment, that the traditions which have grown up about this noble architecture will stimulate you to greater efforts in learning and finer decorum, and a deeper resolve to use your education to further truth, justice, and beauty. This is our faith in you." In the middle of 1931, in February 1931, as construction was completed, President Dorman invited the citizens of Toledo to the new campus for an open house. Over 60,000 came. Today, too many of us take these beautiful buildings for granted. Some assume they were built at the time the university was founded in 1872. To realize that they were built in the middle of the Depression and that they were paid for by the citizens of Toledo who showed their faith in the future of the struggling institution makes them all the more impressive. University Hall is probably the most recognizable building in Toledo and one of the most beautiful examples of collegiate Gothic architecture in the nation, if not the world. To this, we owe thanks to President Dorman. This university, perhaps more than any other leader in our history, is his legacy. Which brings us to event number 4, World War II and its effects, 1941 to 1947. President Dorman passed away unexpectedly of sepsis. Again, Dr. Posel, another one. That resulted from strep throat on November 20th, 1932, at the age of 42. He left behind a wife and 3 small children. His memorial was held in the University Hall Theater, where a few months before he had directed a student production of Hamlet. It was decided to name the theater in his honor. The pressing issues facing the university during the Depression did not stop with Dorman's death. 2 weeks later, Vice President Lee McKinnon informed the directors that the budget was due in 48 hours, and the city was planning to cut it by $30,000. To balance the budgets, the salaries of faculty were cut, and faculty made less than city policemen and firemen. The budget situation was helped by an enrollment increase as students who would have gone to East Coast schools transferred to the University of Toledo due to financial hardship. Dorman was succeeded as president by Philip C. Nash, an unconventional choice. Nash did not have a PhD, and his last academic job had been dean at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. In 1929, he had become executive director of the League of Nations Association, a lobbying group that unsuccessfully worked to get the United States to join the League at the end of World War I. Nash, a man who strongly believed in the need to work towards world peace, would preside over the University of Toledo during the darkest days of World War II. While many in the country were preparing for the possibility of war, most University of Toledo students openly opposed it. They staged a day-long war strike in October 1935 and October 1936. They refused to attend classes and instead gathered to hear speeches opposing the war. President Nash spoke at the events in support of the students. But in his 1936 address, Nash's message to the student had changed from the pacifism he expressed the year before. Quote, freedom, the rights of speech, free thought, liberty to live under a democracy in which government is carried out with the free consent of the governed, these things are more valuable than peace, and it is entirely possible that you will have to fight for them if you want them, Nash said. In 1940, the Board of Directors passed a resolution extending full cooperation to the federal government on war preparedness. The university instituted a program to train civilians for war production jobs that would train over 14,000, many of them were women. Any faculty member who enlisted or was drafted was granted a leave of absence and was assured that they could return to their positions after being discharged. The war's effect on enrollment was immediate and drastic. By February 1942, enrollment had declined by 25%. At the height of the war, the College of Engineering saw a 90% decline. To help lessen the blow, the university contracted to house and train a unit of the 27th Army College Air Corps. Some 1,800 men were housed in the field house and took classes from faculty who transitioned to teach aircrew students when enrollment in their regular classes plunged. Another program trained female students to become Army nurses. There were other immediate effects of the war. Intercollegiate athletics was suspended. Female students outnumbered male students 3-1. While the war was raging, President Nash organized a national conference to examine how the country should plan for peace. He was also concerned how the university should plan for a post-war world. He began a $1 million endowment campaign to raise money to build new buildings that would be needed, as the university's enrollment would increase after the war. Sadly, 108 University of Toledo students were killed fighting in the war. Despite being in poor health, in the spring of 1945, President Nash traveled to San Francisco to participate in the writing of the United Nations Charter. The post-war years changes to the university were profound. The 1944 GI Bill provided an all honorably discharged veterans $500 a year to pay for college. The first year, the students brought in over 1,000 veterans, and by the second year, 2,400. To house the students, the university purchased surplus military trailers and parked them next to the field house. Other students paid $2 a week to sleep in a bunk in the field house. For married students, the university bought 16 surplus duplex housing units from the Willow Run bomber plant and moved them to campus, where they earned the nickname Nashville, a dubious honor for President Nash. For desperately needed classrooms, the university purchased 9 surplus barracks from Camp Perry and installed them behind University Hall as temporary classrooms and research labs. The temporary classrooms would last until 1979, when the last of them was demolished to make way for Centennial Mall. Intercollegiate athletics resumed in 1946, and the football stadium was renamed the Glass Bowl after Toledo companies donated money to upgrade the facility using products produced locally. Politically, students in the post-war era were more conservative. Male students assumed running student organizations again, and women's roles were diminished. With the influx of students, the university began a building boom that would not end until the 1990s. The first was an engineering science building built with Toledo taxpayer money and private fundraising. Ground was also broken for a new library and law school building in 1952, which would be named for longtime library director Mary Gillum upon her retirement. One person who did not live to see these post-war changes was Philip Nash. After leading the university through the Depression and World War II, he was admitted to the hospital in August 1946 with a serious heart ailment, and he died in May 1947 at the age of 56. He was not only for how the university had grown under his leadership, but for his role in the establishment of the United Nations. Which brings us to event number 5, the move to state university status, 1959 to 1967. By the mid-1950s, growing enrollment met head-on with the declining resources from the city of Toledo. 2 failed attempts at tax levies in 1954 and 1956 left the university with very few options. But UT was not the only struggling municipal university in Ohio. So too were the University of Akron and the University of Cincinnati. Toledo city government made it clear that it had reached its limits in its ability to financially support the university. President S. Knowles and the presidents of Cincinnati and Akron began talking about jointly requesting some sort of state support. Knowles was appointed by the governor to the Ohio Commission on Education Beyond High School, which was charged with finding adequate financial support for the rapidly expanding student populations at all public universities in Ohio. But frustrated with the lack of support from the city and the state, President Knowles resigned in May 1958. Selected as the new president was Dr. William S. Carlson, who came with extensive experience in higher education administration. He had been president of the University of Vermont and the University of Delaware, as well as chancellor of the State of New York University System. But even with this experience, finding a solution to the university's fiscal problems was difficult. In January 1959, 2 city council members produced a plan to, over the course of 3 years, turn the university over to the state. The board of directors were incensed that such a plan would be proposed without consulting with them. They passed a resolution stating that such a dramatic change should not be made without adequate consideration of the legal, economic, and political implications. The resolution read in part, "The citizens of Toledo now own a university that has an estimated value of $20 million. They have developed it and supported it at their own expense. In addition to bearing the expense of developing and maintaining this municipal institution, Toledo citizens pay the same cost to the state for support of higher education in Ohio that is paid by others living outside of the city limits of Toledo." The resolution went on to say that steps had to be taken now to discuss with the state a formula and process for providing support to the university, but not giving the university to the state. But when President Carlson met in 1959 with Governor Michael V. DeSalle, a former mayor of Toledo, the governor told him there were no funds available. The governors had been pressured by the existing state universities to deny support to the municipal institutions. This denial meant no state funds would be forthcoming for at least 2 years, and the budget situation was in crisis. Despite 2 recent levy defeats, President Carlson and the board of directors decided to once again approach city voters for funds. A levy to raise $1.7 million a year was placed on the October 1959 primary ballot. The outcome of the levy was in question right up to the end. It passed by just 135 votes. The levy gave the university some breathing room and meant that it did not have to depend on a yearly allocation from the city in building its budget. As the university was trying to move forward with a more stable future, some in Toledo began to press the state to establish more state-supported medical schools. City Council member Michael Damas pressed hard for a new school to be built in Toledo. Various studies conducted at the state level suggested that at least 2 new medical schools were needed and to train the adequate number of doctors needed in Ohio. In 1962, the Board of Directors passed a resolution supporting the construction of one of the new schools at the University of Toledo on 30 acres of land recently purchased along Secor Road. President Carlson even said that if additional land was needed, he would support demolishing the glass bowl. One report said the Ohio legislature should give the university $1 million to begin planning for the new medical school. But some powerful people in Columbus felt the municipally supported University of Toledo was not appropriate as a home for a new medical school, and it also lacked graduate programs in the sciences. The university moved forward with its plans anyway, even developing an architectural rendering of what the new medical school and hospital would look like. Everyone in Toledo was in favor of a new medical school for the city, but the opposition to it being built at the university grew with the election of James Rhodes as the state's new governor. At the last minute, with pressure from Paul Block Jr., publisher of the Toledo Blade, the new medical school was built in the city. The new medical school built in the city was established as a separate institution not affiliated with UT. With the new medical school ending in a disappointing manner, largely because of the criticism that UT was not a state university, President Carlson and the board took up the issue again. In the spring of 1965, the University of Akron requested that it be allowed to become a state university. With its hand forced by Akron in April 1965, Toledo's Board of Directors passed a resolution making a case for its own state status. There was support locally for the move, and City Council formally voted in favor of the proposal in January 1966. With this last piece in place, the state agreed to make the conversion final. The City of Toledo taxpayers agreed and voted in May in 1966 overwhelmingly in favor of conversion to a state university. On July 1st, 1967, the University of Toledo became a state university. President Carlson, at the ceremony where the official turnover occurred, said, "In a sense, these documents represent the efforts of thousands of people, citizens of Toledo, mayors and councilmen, members of the board of directors down through the years, my predecessors in the presidency, and a host of faculty members, administrators, staff members, alumni, and students. We hand these over to you with the pride in what all of these people have done, in full knowledge that they represent a new, stronger relationship." Thus ended 83 years of local control of the university. Unfortunately, the university's budget problems did not end. Which brings me to event number 6, the Community and Technical College, 1969 to 1999. At the same time the university was considering becoming a state university, it undertook a single largest expansion of its physical plant and academic programs. Community college was promoted by the state government as a way to reach students who did not want a 4-year degree, but who could benefit from a 2-year technical degree. Funding for community colleges throughout Ohio was part of several large capital improvement investments approved statewide by voters in the mid-1960s. With state funding for construction, the university was ready to take the plunge and develop a whole new campus. The question became where the new community college should be located. Some wanted it built here because it would provide easy access to student support. But at the time, the question was still unresolved as to where to build the new medical college, and there was still a hope it would be built on the Bancroft Street campus. A strong case was made to build the community college on the original land donated by Jessup Scott in 1872. Since the university supposedly owned that land, there would be no roadblocks to moving forward. But of course, there were roadblocks. The city and the local newspaper objected to the new use. Then a bigger question developed: who actually owned the Scott land? Was it the city, which had assumed all of the assets of the university back in 1884, or was it the university, which was in the process of becoming a state institution? The issue was resolved in court, and groundbreaking for the new campus took place in June 1967. After 95 years, Jessup Scott's land was finally being used for educational purposes. When the Community and Technical College, which quickly became known as Comtech, opened in the fall of 1969, it had cost $7.3 million, had 6 buildings, an enrollment of 2,800, and 21 academic programs. It was expected to grow to 30 buildings by 1985 and attract 10,000 students. For 30 years, Comtech provided both technical degrees and general education for thousands, but it never lived up to its anticipated growth. This was largely due to state requirements that did not allow for differential tuition for students attending the community college than those attending the main campus, which made it difficult to compete. The seamlessness of the transfer between Comtech and the main campus was also fraught with problems. In 1999, with very little study and even less thought as to its consequences, Comtech was closed by President Vic Kapoor. Some programs were merged with the main campus programs. Faculty who taught at Comtech had to request transfers into existing departments or retire or resign. There was also no place for underprepared students who did not meet admission requirements for main campus programs. Today, the Scott Park campus, the land donated by Jessup Scott in 1872 that started it all, is for sale. One is left to wonder if some other solution to Comtech rather than closure might have been considered, and if the college still existed, would it be able to help the university with enrollment issues? Located now almost exactly between the main campus and the health science campus, Scott Park might have had a new life. Event number 7, the Vietnam War, 1965 to 1973. The Vietnam War was a pivotal moment in higher education in general and for the University of Toledo, an awakening in Toledo students, a political awareness that had largely been missing. The free speech movement began in Berkeley, California in 1964 and was influenced by the civil rights movement. Students began to demand the right to free speech and more say in determining university policy and more representation on governing boards and committees. By 1965, when the United States began to send ground troops into the long-simmering Vietnam conflict, the free speech movement converged with an anti-war movement. Students who faced a military draft feared serving in what they considered an unjust war. For these students, the ending of the war was not just a political imperative, but a personal one. As a commuter campus, the University of Toledo was largely conservative in its political leanings. The Collegian even endorsed presidential candidate Richard Nixon over John F. Kennedy in 1960. Protests were centered on issues such as the allocation of space for student organizations and the quality of food offered in dorm cafeterias, which in 1968 led to a food riot in Carter Hall. But the increasing violence in society began to creep into the relatively peaceful campus. In his commencement address delivered on June 5, 1968, President William Carlson quickly revised his remarks to note the assassination attempt against Senator Robert F. Kennedy that happened the night before. At the time of the ceremony, Kennedy was still clinging to life. Carlson spoke about the alienation of students, about the war in Vietnam, and campus unrest. Quote, "But unrest is not confined to students alone. There is political unrest, faculty unrest, economic unrest, and social unrest. All are intertwined," Carlson said. He added, "I must pause to ask a question. Who knows what combination of these factors leads to such a tragedy as occurred in California last night? We mourn the attempt on the life of Robert Kennedy the American, as we mourn Martin Luther King the American and John F. Kennedy the American. This evening, looking at this sorry example before the eyes of the world, we must mourn for our nation itself." President Carlson was generally supportive of a more liberal politics evolving on campus, and he was even one of the first university presidents to speak out openly against the war. When several students were trying to recruit membership into the Students for a Democratic Society, were arrested by campus police for organizing a rally without permission, Carlson unsuccessfully attempted to get the police to drop the charges against them. Carlson welcomed UT students to join in national protest events such as the October 15, 1969 war moratorium that was held simultaneously on 200 campuses across the country. The university also hosted many nationally known speakers who were considered liberals, such as comedian and activist Dick Gregory, Dr. Benjamin Spock, who was a vocal opponent of the war, and Julian Bond, co-founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The Blade said that by national standards, militant activities at the University of Toledo were small, and most UT students were more concerned about parking and having access to athletic event tickets than national political issues. The limits of free speech were tested by the events that occurred on May 1970. On May 4th, members of the Ohio National Guard fired on student protesters at Kent State University in eastern Ohio, killing 4. News quickly spread to UT. The Student Senate demanded a moratorium on classes, which the president agreed to. The next day, Black journalist and commentator Carl Rowan was scheduled to speak on campus, and that speech was held outside, drawing a crowd of over 3,000. Rowan stated that the events at Kent State were an example of violence begetting violence. Some 1,500 students participated in a candlelight vigil, and a teach-in was held to examine the causes and costs of the Vietnam War. The Blade congratulated the university for avoiding the violence that shut down several campuses, including Ohio State. 2 weeks later, a protest similar to the one at Kent State was held at Jackson State College in Mississippi, and it resulted in the death of 2 black students enrolled there. At UT, there was no moratorium on classes, no campus-wide memorial service, and no public declaration of sorrow from the administration. In response, on May 18th, a group of Black students who were angry about the lack of recognition of the deaths of the Mississippi students barricaded University Hall and claimed the administration only mourned white deaths and that Black lives were not of equal importance. Representatives from the Black Student Union met with President Carlson and other administrators and presented a list of demands. After some difficult negotiations and increasing tensions between white and Black students, Carlson agreed to most of the demands. Carlson was widely criticized for giving in to the students, especially by members of the white Toledo community. While the University of Toledo escaped much of the difficulties of other campuses, largely due to Dr. Carlson's open door and open mind, the Vietnam War still had a huge impact on the university. Probably most importantly, student enrollment boomed due to draft deferments were provided to college students. The 14 years of the Carlson administration saw the largest building boom in the university's history. Not only did the students become more politically active on campus, but so did the faculty, and some began to agitate for union representation. Since the university was now a state institution, the population attracted to the university included many living outside of Toledo. This led to an increase in the construction of dormitories and the beginning of the university as a residential campus rather than a commuter one. Which brings us to event number 8, the presidency of Dr. Frank Horton, 1988 to 1998. The presidency of Frank Horton was an important period in the university's history, not for one or two events that changed our history, but for a series of events that came together to challenge the university in ways that had not been challenged before. Many of these challenges continue today. Dr. Frank Horton came to the University of Toledo in 1988. His predecessor was Dr. James McComas, who was beloved by many, and McComas's warm and outgoing personality contrasted with the more reserved Dr. Horton. But while McComas was charming, he was less than hands-on, and after 3 years as president, the university found itself in fiscal jeopardy due to spending that seemed to have been uncontrolled. A year-end audit in 1989 showed overspending by academic departments of $1.3 million. Some 40 faculty positions had been added without the $3.6 million to pay their salaries, and an accounting mistake added another $400,000 to the crisis. This came at a time when the state of Ohio was experiencing drastically reduced tax revenues due to a national recession. Cutbacks in subsidy by the Voinovich administration meant a loss of $2.3 million. On top of these overwhelming issues, much of the expansion of the physical plant undertaken by the McComas administration was funded by high-interest bond financing. The faculty expressed concern over the future debt load of the institution. Despite consistently increasing enrollments, state subsidy had not kept up, and President Horton estimated that the university had lost out on $45 million over 10 years. Unfortunately, all of these changes came to light as it was revealed that Horton himself was spending UT Foundation money for what many believed was an extravagant lifestyle, including a new home for the president. This did not sit well with the city residents, students, or faculty. Then, athletic director Al Bowl, who many in Toledo saw as an outsider like President Horton, fired the beloved football coach, Dan Simrell, who had grown up in Toledo and had played for the university. This brought more unwanted national attention to the university. But the university enrollment kept increasing to 24,000 students. The administration planned for a campus that would accommodate 30,000 and embarked on a building project to match. Classroom space was at a premium, and the administration leased an empty shopping center located just south and west of the campus that added 40,000 square feet of space. This decision was again opposed by the faculty, many of whom were insulted that they had to move their offices and classes into a former discount department store. The faculty found working with President Horton to be difficult. While the president received hefty pay raises yearly, the faculty and staff got little. A popular early retirement program was also eliminated. The American Association of University Professors began a membership drive, adding over 100 members in 1 month. While past efforts to unionize had been blocked by state law and the trustees, changes enacted by the Democratic Celeste administration promoted public unions and removed laws that prohibited collective bargaining by public employees. Once enough members signed cards requesting a vote on collective bargaining, there was little the administration could do but to try to convince the faculty to vote no. In March 1991, in a close vote, the UT-AAUP was chosen as the collective bargaining agent for the faculty. The contract that was approved in 1993 allowed for the first pay raise in 3 years. Enrollment continued to grow, and the state continued to reduce state support, putting the university in a bind. The governor organized a new task force called Managing for the Future that began to look at duplicate programs, low enrollment programs, and the cost of graduate education, and the number of state-supported law schools, with an eye at eliminating programs that were overly expensive. The state's declining support and increasing regulation over the university was the beginning of a trend that continues. But despite all of this bad news, nothing could compare with the events of January 1992. Shortly after students returned to campus from Christmas break, someone fired a handgun into the McKinnon Hall dormitory in the middle of the night. UT police officer Jeffrey Hodge, who was new to the force, was able to respond within 40 seconds. Students were upset, and many expressed concerns about their safety. A week later, tragedy struck when a nursing student from Rocky River, Ohio, was found shot to death on the Comtech campus. Officer Hodge was on the scene shortly after the body was discovered. The investigation showed that the gun that had killed Melissa Herstrom matched the bullets found at McKinnon Hall a week earlier. The campus and the community were shocked to learn that Jeffrey Hodge, one of the university's own police officers who was charged with protecting students, was the killer. In addition to the personal pain that this caused President Horton, he was criticized relentlessly in the press. The news of the murder was nationally covered, including extensively in Cleveland, near where Herstrom was from. After the tragedy, enrollment began to decline for the first time. As one outcome of the Regents' Managing for the Future plan, the state ended its support for the English and History doctoral programs, and the Chinese and Russian language programs were eliminated as well. All of these changes, declining enrollment, declining state support, demands to eliminate costly and under-enrolled academic programs, increasing indebtedness, bad publicity, unionized faculty, community anger, and declining public support would be trends that would continue for some time. While the university was clearly suffering with unprecedented problems, the solution was perhaps even worse. After President Horton announced his retirement, the Board of Trustees looked to someone who might be able to solve the problems, particularly the faculty who seemed out of control. The next president, however, would fix none of the problems, and many would contend he only exacerbated them. Dr. Vic Kapoor was selected for the presidency despite many clues that his solutions would not be the right ones. That presidency lasted only 17 months, and in some ways, the university continues to deal with the after effects of his brief tenure. Which brings me to event number 9, the merger of the University of Toledo and the Medical University of Ohio, 2006. There are many times throughout their parallel histories that a merger between the University of Toledo and the Medical College of Ohio were seriously considered. In 1970, Ohio Board of Regents Chair John Millett proposed merging the two institutions as a way to reduce the cost of medical education. Surprisingly, one of the most vocal supporters of the merger at that time was the Blade, which had fought so hard to make certain that MCO was not a part of the University of Toledo when it was founded in 1964. In an editorial, the Blade stated, "From an administrative, financial, or academic point of view, it makes little sense for the state to permit two schools to function completely independently in the same city only minutes apart." But the merger did not happen. In 1972, as President William S. Carlson was retiring, so too was MCO President Dr. Glidden Brooks. Millett again suggested that the institutions agree to select the same person as their president. Once again, the Blade supported the merger. The paper said if the two institutions passed up this opportunity for a merger, the opportunity might not present itself again. The search committees declined to consider a joint search, however, and the merger opportunity number 2 ended. In 1994, President Frank Horton investigated the possibility of a merger, but did not consult with the leadership of MCO. The Blade, which had already had a contentious relationship with Horton, used this as yet another cudgel to hammer him publicly. Merger attempt number 3 ended. In 2002, UT President Daniel Johnson confidentially sent a position paper he drafted proposing a merger to interim MCO President Amira Gohara. Johnson laid out his reasonings for the merger: declining resources from the state, removing duplication of administrative costs, elevating the national profiles of both institutions, and creating joint research programs. He suggested that because MCO was looking for a new president, there was a small window of opportunity for the merger to happen. The MCO leadership was not swayed. The Vice President for Government Affairs said he rejected all of Johnson's arguments. Merger attempt number 4 ended. The person selected as the new president of MCO was Dr. Lloyd Jacobs. He became president after a period of instability in the leadership of the college. After Jacobs assumed the presidency, Dr. Johnson again sent his position paper proposing a merger with the University of Toledo to Dr. Jacobs. This time, the proposal was favorably received, and private discussions about merging the two institutions began in earnest. The first hint of a merger came from comments made by Dr. Jacobs in a commencement address at the University of Toledo in May 2005. In September of 2005, the now Medical University of Ohio's Board of Trustees requested a business analysis to determine if the merger was viable. Suddenly, the 40-year logjam that had stopped a merger broke. By November 2005, Dr. Jacobs said, "We believe the proposed combination of MUO and UT would be beneficial to both institutions, as well as to the state of Ohio and the community of Toledo." Within a month, a terms document that outlined the basics of a merger was agreed to by the boards of the two institutions. A key to making the merger happen this time was the speed at which it commenced. By December 2005, both boards had approved the merger, and it was completed by July 1st, 2006. President Jacobs became the president of the new institution, and the chair of the new board of trustees became the president of the new combined board. The merger created a new university with 23,000 students, 7,000 employees, and a research budget of $55 million. By some measures, it was the third largest university in the state and one of only 17 universities in the country to offer the breadth of degree programs. Not anticipated by those planning the merger was a major national economic recession that began in 2008. The cost of the merger was estimated to be $40 million, but the legislature provided no money to cover these costs. The state again slashed support for higher education. There were also cultural and management differences that became apparent during those first few years of the merger. In some ways, the merger is still a work in progress. Which brings us to event number 10, the COVID pandemic 2022, who knows when. The last event I want to discuss is the COVID pandemic of the past 2 years. But unlike other events in our history, the impact of this event is not now known, and an historical analysis is not yet possible. But there is no doubt that it has and will continue to have an impact. Dr. Gregory Postal became interim president with extensive experience in both university and hospital administration just as the pandemic was beginning. Prior to coming to Toledo, he was vice president for health affairs and served as interim president at the University of Louisville. It is hard to imagine a new president in the past 150 years who faced challenges of such magnitude. During the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918-1919, the university canceled classes for 5 days as part of a large citywide shutdown in hopes of containing the outbreak. But in March 2020, the university quickly closed down for the remainder of the academic year because of the COVID pandemic. Students moved out of their dorm rooms, and all classes went online almost overnight. As I took my morning walks through the campus, it was eerily empty. I began to question how and if the university could survive. During the summer, the administration worked on plans to bring the students back while remaining in compliance with state, local, and national guidelines for the pandemic. Fortunately, students were able to return to a shortened fall semester with random COVID testing a requirement for all employees and students. In addition to the public health concerns, there was, of course, the budgetary ones. With the university's budget already in difficult straits due to declining enrollment and the fear that many more students would not enroll due to the pandemic, the situation was one of great uncertainty. The Higher Learning Commission was also scheduled to conduct a reaccreditation review. While an interim leader, Dr. Postal still moved forward to address 8 key initiatives, particularly how to stem the decline in enrollment. Having gained the confidence of the Board of Trustees and the university community with his steps as interim leader, he was appointed permanent president in March 2021. Funding from the federal government helped the university weather the COVID downturn. The money not only helped the university, but also the University of Toledo Medical Center. The hospital also received a $25 million grant from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That stemmed the losses for the hospital, and President Postal moved forward with planning for long-term improvements. Despite all that was done to recover from the pandemic, the university and higher education overall still face many challenges and much uncertainty. As Dr. Postal has stated recently, the continuing decline in enrollment is not sustainable. A new strategic plan will likely call for a leaner university with fewer but stronger academic programs. A new budget model will require responsibility by all. So here are the 10 events that I believe have shaped and continue to shape the University of Toledo. But overarching these 10 events is one constant theme running through the university's 150 years, aside from parking that is, which always seems to be a problem. The insufficient funding to allow the university to achieve its full potential, and I wrote these marks before I knew the chancellor was going to be in attendance. The problem dates all the way back to the city's founding, when Jessup W. Scott thought leasing land near a proposed railroad terminal would fund the institution. It continued in 1884, when the university thought becoming municipally supported would be the answer. But because of early battles with city council, the budget proved insufficient to the point that President Jerome Raymond in 1909 tried to embarrass the council by pointing out that the city was spending as much for an elephant as it was supporting its university. President Dorman succeeded in getting the taxpayers to approve $2.8 million to build a new campus, but he found little funding for operations. President Nash refused to spend money to construct a sidewalk into University Hall, preferring to have students and faculty walk through the mud than divert money from academic programs. And in 1935, he canceled 20 phone lines to save $80 a month. President Asa Knowles thought the solution was to expand funding from the city to include county taxpayers, but this plan was rebuffed by voters. President Carlson thought the solution was to join the state of Ohio's system of higher education in 1967. But beginning in the 1970s, the state began dramatically cutting back its share of the cost of operating the university. With few other options, the university began increasing tuition every year, usually around 10%. During the presidency of Dr. Frank Horton, budget deficits were in the $2 to $3 million range. In 2006, the governor helped to foster the merger of the University of Toledo and the Medical University of Ohio, in part to save money. But during the presidency of Dr. Lloyd Jacobs, budget deficits each year were in the tens of millions of dollars. And we know now that a year after returning to normal with on-campus learning, the budget continues to take hits. This is not meant to end this talk on a low note. A university that has survived against many odds for 150 years is indeed something to be proud of. But it also seems to me that at this mile marker of 150, we are placed again at an important and uncertain juncture. It will take the best minds, the dedication of all, and hopefully the experience of the past to forge a way forward to the future. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, this is so kind. Thank you. I don't know if we have time, but I would be glad to answer one or two questions if anyone has anything they would like to ask. No? I answered all your questions. Yes, John.
I'm just curious. I mean, obviously Scott Park was there, it's owned by the university, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the decision was made to build on Bancroft Street. Do you know anything about what was Scott Park?
Well, Scott Park was considered, but the students didn't want it built there. The Scott Park campus was, the area is really an industrial area, and they had problems with vagrants. They had problems with, undesirable people hanging around the campus, and the students were absolutely opposed to building the permanent campus at Scott Park. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes. I believe that, unfortunately, the portrait of Mr. Dorman is still missing. It was removed when they renovated the Dorman Theater many, many years ago, and it hasn't been found, I don't believe. So, unfortunately, one of our great leaders, we don't have a portrait of him, but we still remember him. This campus is his legacy. Any other questions? Yes. I absolutely agree. That is probably choosing that architecture was probably one of the most important decisions in this institution's history. And I think, again, I think we take them for granted, but someday when you're on your lunch hour or something, go out, walk around that building, and just look at it. It is just absolutely extraordinary. Every inch of it is just amazing. And I think we are all, in great debt to Dr. Dorman for having that vision. So, one more. Yes, Andy. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think its municipal roots are probably a large part of that close connection. I wish it were closer today. You know, in some ways, I think it's kind of drifted apart over the past 20 years. But, you know, I think there's still so much support. You know, the University of Toledo football team is the Toledo's football team, and it always will be. So, well, thank you all very much for coming, and I appreciate it. And I'm going to actually, I guess, sign some books if anyone wants to buy one. And so thank you very much. What a wonderful afternoon. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.